happening in the background there?
It's not my kids.
All right, and we are live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Canadian-Austrian Round Table discussion. This is a real pleasure for me. I'm John Szabo. I'm sitting in Prince Edward County now, just outside of Toronto. And this is the first of the Canadian series of Austrian webinars. There have been two previous. There was one in the UK a couple of weeks ago and last week in the United States, both with an amazing group of panels. If you didn't have a chance to see those, then you can find them online on YouTube. And this seminar as well, or this webinar rather, will also be recorded and put up. So if you need to step away at any time in the next hour or so, can come back and catch all of the details here. So the format is pretty simple. I've got four panelists, all from the Toronto area. That's why we're calling this the Canadian version of this Austrian wine webinar, though for me, the way I kind of think about it, a webinar is very much like a virus. And hear me out on that one there, but a virus knows no boundaries. A webinar knows no boundaries. So I know we've got people tuning in from East Coast and West Coast and over in Europe. So good evening to those of you who are in Europe, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. And we're going to look at this from a Canadian perspective, but obviously this is a pretty internationally savvy crew. They have all been to Austria, some of them many times. So we should have some great insight and detail. We'll give you a little bit about the background, some technical details, and then we've got 6 wines to taste with you, virtually with you. These are wines that I selected, so don't blame any of the other panelists. They were forced to taste these wines, but we've got pretty much all of the top producers in Austria represented in Ontario. They're not always in stock, but I'm pretty happy with the selection that we managed to come up with here. So let's jump in. By the way, if you have any questions, comments at any point along the way, please jump in. Right behind the red and white Austrian banderole that you see on the top of every Austrian bottle of wine is the Austrian Wine Marketing Board behind the scenes, ready to take your questions and pass them our way. So you can direct them specifically to one of the panelists or make it a more general query. We are here for you. We will do our best to answer all of your questions. So let's roll with that video if we could, please. Terrific. The Austrian Wine Marketing Board does things so well. So let's start off by introducing our panelists. I'm going to start on my bottom left corner with Jennifer Huether, Master Sommelier, Canada's first female Master Sommelier, who has changed jobs recently, and I've known you longer than anyone on this panel, yet I have no idea really what you're doing. You're a self-described social herbivore. So please tell us a little bit about your current situation.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Excited to be here. Yes, so really focusing on plant-based food and wine, and focusing in on how to match it, how to elevate it, how to understand it. And I'm doing that with my partner, Priya. So we have launched a website and our Instagram, and we're working on many projects with that. So super excited about that. And I've been a member of the team of Gargoyle Wine Club for the past 1.5 years. So we deliver wine across Canada. And yeah, that's really fun too.
Terrific. And isn't it a fortunate thing that there are so many vegan certified wines in Austria? A happy place for you to go and drink. All right, let's also now bring in Krysta Oben. She's partner and head sommelier wine buyer at Paris, one of Toronto's top wine bars, and also a grape witch. Please tell us what a grape witch is.
Tell you more. Hi, I'm Krysta. I have a little wine bar in Toronto called Paris, and also another business called Grape Witches. We have a wine club, an importing agency, which brings in a couple of cool Austrian wines, and do a whole bunch of events right now from our living room. I just realized 1 year ago today I was at Heinrich petting all the cute animals and tasting all the incredible wines.
Well, this won't be quite like that, but I guess it's the next best thing under the conditions. All right, and next to Krysta, I've got Christopher Seeley, who's the wine director for Alo Restaurants, a group of restaurants considered among the top in Canada, actually voted #1 in Canada most recently, I think. So, Christopher, what's new in your life?
Just spending time at home and thinking about what the future is of our industry. The crew down at Alo and the Alo group of restaurants are consistently or continually doing some takeout and growing week to week, doing some wine sales on the side, I believe. But I myself have been just kind of musing and meditating on what the future will be in terms of sustainability, in terms of how we need to rebuild our industry, i.e. the economy, and how we need to, I think, link and look at our suppliers' connections in a very different way. Austrian wines for sure are kind of on the cutting edge of sustainability, biodynamics, and getting back to the roots of where they're coming from. And I think we need to do that in our own backyards, myself included. And also how SOMs might need to reimagine what they do and how their role is in the restaurant going forward, from just not somming, but managing to directing to assisting in whatever way. So the future is bright, and I think it gives us a chance to re-examine, and how we perform in the restaurant, the hospitality industry, and in society at large. I would say we are part of the problem, but we are also part of the solution.
Well, the times, they are a-changing indeed. I think a little bit more on that coming up, but let's also bring in Mr. Bruce Wallner, Master Sommelier, also based in Toronto, and the owner-proprietor of the Grand Cru Deli, which is I think it's a wine school masquerading as a wine bar, or is it a wine bar masquerading as a wine school?
Well, Grand Cru Deli was previously a wine bar, and hopefully will be a wine bar again. Now we're focusing on takeout and increased our retail-esque selection. We want to keep serving people however we can, right? And obviously everyone's limited, so they can't serve guests in a real hospitality manner, but we try to carry it forward as best we can. So we have wine. We have the Sommelier Factory, the wine school, and then we have Grand Cru Deli, which, as mentioned, wine bar, suddenly wine shop.
I can see you're pretty well stocked from the images behind you there, so at least you have that.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to die of thirst, that's for sure.
Right, and so as I mentioned, I'm John Szabo, also a master sommelier, and one of the principal writers, critics at winealign.com. And I can tell you what we've seen in our business, which has been principally a site for publication and review of wines. We also have a wine club on the side called the Winealign Exchange, and that has really exploded in the last couple of months as wine sales move ever more towards DTC, direct to consumer. That's been a huge shift in, I think, the wine world that we've seen just about all over the world. If you look at sales figures around Europe, also in the United States, everyone is trying to get direct, and I think that's a key avenue that wineries really need to position themselves to take advantage of in the next little bit. So we're going to jump into the wines in Austria here in a second, but I'm just curious to hear if, Jennifer, you have anything to add on how you think or how you see the wine world evolving from your perspective?
I mean, yeah, just what you said about direct to consumer, you can see there's, wine clubs are flourishing. Somms are putting together their own choices and their own packs and getting those direct to consumer. And hearing just from the agent side of things too, they've really had to dig in and build their private client business through this. And while restaurants are going to open up, it is going to look different. So I think that some of that is going to stay with us.
And Krysta, have you come up with any magical solutions for the rest of us in hospitality?
Oh my gosh, not yet. I'm just holding down the fort at the restaurant, doing some...
I think Krysta is still somehow not in.
Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, doing some sales to consumers and finding with Grape Witches that we have a great connection with our consumers already through all the stuff we've done over the last few years. And selling wine packs to them has been super fun. So kind of enjoying this downtime, which is unexpectedly busy.
How are you reaching your customers?
Instagram, the only way we know.
And you joined us last night for a little blind tasting showdown.
Yeah, it was really nervous.
You schooled Sam. It was amazing.
Thank you for choosing a Shannon for me.
Well, listen, I think we're entering a golden age of wine communication and wine education, and looking at this great opportunity to have all of us here on the panel and people tuning in from all over the world. This is really maybe the best time in the history of the world to be able to get information about wine, to connect with people all around the world, with winemakers, with sommeliers. So this is a silver lining in all of this madness.
Yeah, John, if I can jump in, I think that's an important point, and I don't know if it's scheduled for later in this conversation, but these kind of things where we're still reaching out, we're still staying connected. They seem like a nice bit of fun, but they're super important, right? We've lost our standard connection. The more we connect like this and stay in touch with, in this case with Wines of Austria, but also with each other and songs around the world, it's crucial, right? We don't stop doing this. We gotta keep going. And I think that goes for everybody. Keep contacting your colleagues and keep contacting your friends, and don't leave anyone behind.
Agreed. Thanks for that, Bruce. And yes, thank God for wine, not just for its soothing effects, although that's nice too, but mostly for its ability to take us places, right? So we can travel and literally get the taste of a place in a glass of wine. So today's all about Austria and Austrian wines. So bear with me here. I'm going to throw up a couple of slides. Hopefully this moves smoothly on this platform. All right, I think probably most of the crowd tuning in has a pretty strong sense of where wine grows in Austria. Obviously, it's mostly on the eastern border. In the west, there's some fantastic skiing, but a little bit less, just a few dozen hectares of vines planted. But let's start our little tasting adventure off down in the Steiermark region, and specifically Südsteiermark, which is about half of all the plantings in Steiermark, some 2,100 or so hectares, where the great variety of choice that is pretty much the headline variety is Sauvignon Blanc. Just a couple words about the region and a couple of photos. Let's see if I can get this whiteboard on here. It's a challenging place to grow grapes. You've got a lot of weather systems coming in off the Adriatic, moving north, bearing a lot of moisture, and as they reach these pretty much subalpine hills here. The highest point in Südsteiermark is somewhere up here around 600, 700 meters. The clouds rise and they drop their moisture, often in the form of rain, but also often in the form of hail. The hail is a real threat that can, in some cases, like in 2016, pretty much decimate the harvest. Some estates were down as much as 80%. So it's not without challenges. And the challenges are not just weather related, they're also just topographically related. Here's the great Zierig vineyard of Temens here. Can't quite get a sense of how dramatically steep some of these hillsides are. Oh, we threw this one in there. That is a bird banger called the Clapotet. So if you're sitting in one of the little Buschenshanks on top of a hill in Styria, you probably see one of these things that were designed to scare away the birds. And you know what? You'd probably be drinking a Mischung. Have you guys ever had a Mischung? This is the Styrian version of the spritzer, but spritzer is soda water. The Mischung is with sparkling mineral water. That's an important little side thing to know, but I digress. All right, there's Armin Tement. We're going to taste his wine in just a moment. He's standing in the Grasnitzberg vineyard, and you can get a sense from the way he's standing there just how steep these slopes are. In some extreme cases, there's another shot of the Zierig, and we say this with a little bit of levity, but it really is quite dangerous to drive tractors here. Accidents do happen frequently. They've in fact designed special hydraulic braking systems for the tractors in use here on some slopes that can surpass 100 degrees. All right, so that is about as steep as you'd want. It's steeper than anything you'd find in the Wachau. And you notice there are no terraces here for a pretty simple reason. There's very little rock to quarry. number one, so there's nothing to form stone terraces out of. And number two, there are no monks in the region, and monks were pretty much the only ones with enough time on their hands to build those walls. Nobody in their right mind would do that today. And there's Gerhard Wulmuth in his Edelschuhe vineyard, which makes spectacular Riesling, but you have to count something like 5 to 6 times more work hours per vineyard per year when you're dealing with slopes that steep. So anyhow, if you're considering value propositions, the amount of effort it takes to grow grapes here, it's pretty extraordinary. So Bruce, if you wouldn't mind taking us into the first wine here, the Herrenhausen Sauvignon Blanc. By the way, if anyone's looking for the list of wines, just check the file button on the side of your screen. You can download the PDF of all the wines that we're tasting. But give it a label flash, if you would.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, it's the Weingut Tament. From the Herrenhausen, if you, I think everyone has access to the file to look at those maps. Again, the village of Herrenhausen is down relatively close to the Slovenian border, but you can see it clearly on the map you showed before. So this is their Sauvignon Blanc. It's labeled as Muskelkalk, which is limestone. And so I guess your expectation on this is that it's pretty minerally, and it's pretty minerally. I don't know what you call it if you're tasting it blind. I guess the sensible thing is Puy Fumé and Sancerre, and I guess we have to make that comparison. I made that comparison in a big way because I was hungry as well, so I grabbed some goat cheese, and it makes a lot of sense. It's absolutely singing in acidity. It's very fresh, very bright, also great minerality underneath. You know what? This is what I look for in a Sauvignon Blanc. It does have a bit of greenness to it. Like you recognize the pyrazines on this almost immediately when you smell it. When I first opened it, that was slightly dominant. It was more like a spring pea kind of greenness, but as I worked through it, the minerality just came out of it. It's super fresh. A big part of this wine is lees contact. I think they do over 12 months, and it shows as a real texture to it. I'm just gonna try some.
Well, yeah, I think your analogy with more old world and new world style is appropriate here. Although there are some green pipes sectors, it's not dramatically pungent, and in the Marlborough classic Marlborough style, for example. And believe it or not, Tament, as far as I know, he's all wild ferment, but mallow goes through. So imagine this without malolactic conversion. Wow. So, I mean, looking for that steely, very reserved, very fruit backwards, limestone forward. Muskelkalk means fossil limestone. Those of you who've been up to Alsace will know that they make a distinction between their shell limestone and their standard limestone. I mean, not all limestone is the same, but really I think what makes these wines is that challenging climate, cool climate, and you have to be on a hillside. If you're not, you're down in the valley where it's waterlogged, it's fertile, and you're growing a lot of pumpkins, by the way. Another as the pumpkin seed oil, which is the best in the world. Amazing stuff. But if it weren't for those slopes, we wouldn't be enjoying this wine. Would anyone else like to weigh in? You got something else to say, Bruce?
The texture is remarkable on it. You know, we use minerality terms as descriptors, and a lot of people say, "Oh, that's a bunch of horseshit." And you know what? Minerality can be a pretty vague descriptor. But drinking this, it reminds you of eating chalk as a child, right? Like, it really has incredible texture to it. And if anyone's wondering, like the taste of chalk, you just drink this wine, and I think it comes shining through in the end. That's a cool wine.
I mean, what I like about this wine is where it sits in between what we know and expect, maybe from a guest perspective, maybe certainly from a sommelier perspective, what we might want to list for Loire Valley Sauvignon Blanc to New Zealand or anywhere else for that matter, even Ontario. And I still feel that this wine has all the characteristics of what we expect from Sauvignon, but a unique character that is special to its origin, where it's coming from. It fits a place, and I think it is certainly worthy of being listed. We've listed some, I would say, entry-level wines at one of our establishments, in it well, But having been to the vineyards, the steepness, the environment, the microclimate, I mean, it just shows in a different way than most people expect or experience Sauvignon Blanc. And if you're a Chablis lover or dead set on Chablis, which is more about the tone of the wine, and I think Bruce kind of hit it on the head with that chalkiness, the minerality. It is not a neutral wine by any stretch of the imagination. And I think with time, with some food and maybe decanted, the wine certainly opens up in this lovely white, floral, savory, earthy, that green springtime freshness, which I really love about these wines. Yeah.
And what, it's $40 from Le Sommelier. I totally agree with you, Christopher. It's a wine of place, right? Like it's confusing actually if you don't have it on your radar. But $40 for that, I think that's a good bottle of wine.
Well, you generally know you're in a good producer's tasting room when the list of wines is about that long. When I was tasting last attainment, I think I tasted probably 30 wines, mostly Sauvignon, a bit of Morillon, of course, Chardonnay, which is the other specialty of Südsteiermark, I would say. And this wasn't even one of the wines I tasted. So he's got an amazing range. He's got that Zierich vineyard that we saw, that crazy steep vineyard, which he's subdivided into a number of different micro parcels and bottles each of those separately. So he's really obviously playing around with the idea of expressing the minute differences that we get excited about. But if you take it on a more macro level, stylistically, nobody's mentioned Friuli, but you're right across the border, Friuli in Slovenia, not far away, and I find some similarities with those sorts of those styles of wine. Jen, do you have anything to add on this Sauvignon?
Yeah, well, I find this really interesting. It's so terroir driven. I mean, I agree with you, Bruce. It's like drinking rocks. And I remember studying Austria blind many years ago, back for the masters, and we would do Riesling. Typically, we would do Gruner. And what was always interesting is when you would taste them, it was almost like you're tasting Austria first. Yeah. We would, you're tasting it in a blind environment, and it's like, wow, that's Austria. Okay, now let me dig down and figure out what white grape this is from Austria. And I really feel like this exemplifies that. It's really delicious, very edgy, a very edgy, interesting, mineral-driven wine.
Yeah, I probably should have told you, we quote you a lot on that. When we're doing blind tasting and people are like, I think it's Gruner Veltliner, and I go through things like, it's okay. Jen tells us that you taste Austria first.
Krysta, did you taste Austria in this glass?
I really did taste Austria in this glass. It, like Chris was saying, it's such a special kind of wine to be able to offer at a restaurant. It can really surprise people who are expecting something from the Loire, expecting something more traditional from New Zealand, to take them on this cool journey with a grape that they're comfortable with already. Makes you look like a bit of a hero to some people.
Well, we're going to be tasting some red wines in a moment, but let's not forget Austria is white wine country, to its, I think, commercial detriment some years ago. I mean, I remember first tasting Austrian wines back in the 90s, and I've always been a white wine lover. The red wines were a little less impressive back in those days, but the style of wine that Austria was producing, and I'm generalizing here, was for a market that didn't yet exist. Back in the 90s, what were we all drinking? Big, lush California-style Chardonnays and bigger is better red wines. We all seen that change. We all know that. That's not a secret. So Austria has, at the same time, increased quality, but also benefited from the cycles of preference in the consumer world and the sommelier world, to the point where they're now producing wines that more and more people love. It's 2/3 white in the country now, and the white percentage is increasing as far as I understand. And for me, this is a genuinely brilliant place to go looking for great white wines. But let's not forget about the reds. More on those in a moment. Any last comments on Sauvignon Blanc from Southern Styria before we move on? Place on your list? I'm going to guess yes.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into our next wine here. I'm going to throw you a couple of slides again. So let's leave behind the beautiful hills of Steiermark No, not quite yet. There's a Great Sattlerhof Vineyard. Okay, so now we're going to move to an area that I think most people are familiar with, the Wachau. There we are, right in the Danube Valley. And again, a couple of brief things, actually in general, about the appellations in the Danube Valley, Wachau, Kremstal, Kamptal, and south of the river, Traisental and Wagram. If you consider, most of the weather systems are coming in from the east here. That's Hungary over across the border, and a very large, flat, pretty hot plain, certainly in the summertime. Anyone who's been down around Lake Neusiedler in June or July of a hot summer, like 17 or 18 or 19, you know it gets pretty smoking hot there. So all of this warm weather moves into the valley, and as the Danube Valley tightens up, the influence becomes a little bit less pronounced, and it gets progressively cooler. So, for example, if we are, let's get that mode there. So here's a shot of the Wachau. The harvest time difference, believe it or not, from around Dürnstein and Unterleuben is about 2 weeks earlier, depending on who and when exactly, than up around Spitz Valley. As soon as you get up into the Spitz Valley, it was at some point 20, 30 years ago considered folly to grow grapes there at all because it was simply too cool. Now this is a pretty hot spot, more figuratively than literally, to be looking for vineyards, because it's actually perfect nowadays for really brilliant balanced wines. And we know the history of the Wachau, centuries old, literally over 1,000 single vineyards that were demarcated in the very Burgundian fashion that Cistercian monks were wont to do. And you can see all of the different individual vineyard sites here. So I tell you what, if you have the opportunity, for those listening in who have not been to Austria, get yourself to the Wachau and do a little vineyard tasting of Grüner Veltliner or Riesling. Riesling, which is representatively quite small in Austria overall, is actually very important in the Wachau. Obviously, Grüner Veltliner is still the most planted white variety, but Riesling among some of the best in the world in a dry style. So here you get a sense of what the region looks like. That's the Danube River flowing to the east towards Hungary, eventually making its way out to the Black Sea. And we're going to taste wine from this gentleman here, whose family has owned Nikolaihof, the Stas family, since 1894. So I'm not sure which generation he represents now, but we're into 5 or 6. But the property itself is 2,000-year-old. Gorgeous cellar. If you poke around the Nikolaihof property, you will find Roman settlements. In fact, 2,000 years ago, this was a Roman encampment, and it was later a monastery. It's gone through just about every iteration you can imagine that a property would go through over 2,000 years in this part of the world. And those beautiful barrels, by the way, giant barrels, some wines in the Nikolaihof range spend up to 20 years. Those of you who have tasted the remarkable Vinotek range, these wines that literally not released for 12, 15, 20 years, are among the most unique and unusual in the world. So I was talking about the narrowing of the Danube Valley. So looking west, looking up into the hills, you can see how the river carves an ever tighter channel through the ranges on either side. And if you're looking east towards Hungary, it's not perfectly visible here, but it broadens out a little bit. The last thing I'll mention about soils in particular, and then Christopher's going to take it from here, is that those weather systems moving in from Hungary back in the glacial period deposited a lot of loess, that wind-blown soil, into very thick terraces in some part, more prevalent in the more eastern appellations, Kremstal and Kamptal, and south in Wagram and Traisental, a little bit less in the Wachau. But it's funny to travel around these vineyards. You can see that those that are exposed to those winds from the west are scoured. So you expose the barren, they call it primary rock. It's essentially gneiss or parangneiss or amphibolite, hard metamorphic rocks. And on the leeward side of the hills is where the loess collects. And if you look at what varieties grow in each section, Riesling and hard rock are a match made in heaven, whereas Grüner Veltliner needs a more generous, more water retentive, more fertile site, because it's a variety that demands more, and that's where you find most of the Grüner. So there's lots of fun to be had tasting, say, Grüner from the few primary rock sites on which it grows, and those from the loess sites. But how about, there's one of my favorite vineyards, the Achleiten. But we digress yet again. Christopher, why don't you, let's leave that photo up there. Tell us a little bit about, we're going to taste two Gruners side by side, but let's start off with the Nikolaev.
Nikolaev. So we're going to do two Gruners side by side. And as many of you are on the Instagram world, it's sort of like a versus, if you will. You might think maybe Miles Davis versus John Coltrane, or Tupac versus Biggie, or J-Rock versus like DJ Jazzy Jeff, or whatever, for all you out there who get the reference. But Nikolaev, as John mentioned, yes, they've been around. The wine has been made on this land and space for roughly 2,000 years or so. The wine for this Grunewaldiner Terrassen, this is a 2017 vintage, are coming from the appellation, or the sort of village, as we showed in the map previous, Motown Donau, from approximately from vineyard holdings that are no more than 2.5 kilometers from the river system, the Danube, as John mentioned in his previous images. So gives you a sense of how cool and fresh and mineral and light these wines are. They are usually and always the first to be harvested. So we're looking at, in 2017 vintage, somewhere in the second half of September, whereas other vineyards within the Nikolaev family of wines might be harvested coming end of September into October. Again, as John said, the vineyard soils are mainly loam and loess. And I get back to the verses energy with, say, a Miles Davis kind of reference, is that there's a bit more of a traditional but still contemporary expression to some of these wines, in the fact that they've been working biodynamic since one of the first wineries in the world. 1971 exactly is when they started working biodynamically, and have still managed to work that way in a spirit where it is about the soil, a rejuvenation of the soil, in order to enhance and maintain the quality of production that they work with. They are part of the Vigne Vacau. There is a website, vignevacal.at. There is an app which gives you a little rundown of what this means, where the vineyards are located, the soil, and their prerequisite, as well as following biodynamic prerequisites, is about picking everything by hand. Everything is a gentle expression of what the soil and the land brings. The wines are, this particular wine rather, goes through a gentle pressing. I'm not quite sure if it's whole bunch or not. Maybe someone on in the world of wine out there in Austria can answer this, but spontaneous yeast ferment. It is in large oak casks, somewhere between 2,000 to 12,000 hectoliter, 6 months in casks, and then bottled on a fruit day. So very specific, very focused on getting and not disturbing this cosmological energy that is present and harnessed in the land and in the wine. And I think as you taste it, I mean, there's something more than just technically made wine. I think there's a bit more of a spiritual, philosophical energy that is part of the household and the family saws in what they do with this wine. So I'm not sure if you've all had a chance to taste it. There is certainly, based on the spontaneous yeast, natural ferment, large oak casks is where the wines are setting. There is a slight reduction on the nose, but doesn't take away from what the wine offers, and this sort of lovely peach, apricot, savory, zingy freshness. Again, you get that minerality from the loam, the loess, and the nice rock in the wine. Altitude, which is, I think, very important and critical to how these wines show, somewhere between 200 to 290 meters above sea level is where the terraced vineyards are located along the river system. So I think quite a beautiful and lifted wine. This is a base wine for their production, and you can only imagine how much more significant and energetic the wines reach as you move into the upper tiers of what they offer.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and any other comments from the panel?
Yeah, I like what Krysta was saying about energy. Like, there's a real energy to this wine. There's got tremendous vibrancy, and it has that bizarre thing, that Niederösterreich thing that the best wines do. They give you this incredible impression of fruit ripeness.
Yes.
And then they go totally dry. It's quite remarkable, right? You're like, wait, is there a lot of RS in this? No, there's not. But it gives you the impression for a moment that Yeah. I love it, and again, very distinctive.
I think it's worth pointing out that in the Wachau in particular, there's pretty high day and nighttime temperature shift, diurnal shift. So that means, of course, you get the warmth during the daytime and no shortage of sunlight, particularly if you're on one of those south-facing steep terrace slopes. Yet you have pretty cool nights with cool air flowing down out of the mountains to the north. In this case, you're on the south side of the river, but it still gets cool enough there that you retain lots of acidity. One other thing that struck me, I mean, yes, you're quite right. One of the oldest biodynamic estates. They are Demeter certified at Nikolaihof. But
Yes.
Let's not forget that Austria is, I mean, the father of biodynamics, Rudolf Steiner, was an Austrian. So we're kind of at the epicenter, the beginning of it all. So it kind of makes sense that they would be one of the oldest estates. But there's another association I think you're all familiar with called Respect, which is a bit of a spin-off, if you will. Started by guys like Fred Leumer and Fritz Wieninger. We're going to taste wine from Wieninger in just a moment. But this is yet another group that is really pushing the cosmological side of wine production, I guess you could say, really aiming for something that is truly sustainable. And I mean that in the broadest sense, which could lead to another discussion altogether about what we consider fine wine. For me, I think an increasing part of that definition has to be not just great quality, but also produced by a producer who believes in sustainability. That's not just environmental, but social and all the rest of it, economic.
And I certainly agree with that, John. Not because we are on an Austrian round table, but having been to the land on 2 occasions, and I know you've traveled there, and all of us, all my peers, I think we can understand that in the restructuring of what we do and how vineyards and how wines can be produced. I think we can learn many lessons from what people are doing in Austria, and getting back to the size of Nikolaihof. And even when we move into Wenn, which I think maybe we could do based on our time, they're working with, at Nikolaihof, I believe, somewhere around 30 hectares of land, and maybe and what we're doing with Wesley is somewhere around 22. So everything is, under their handmade, hand harvested, hand pressed. We're not looking at large companies and large wineries here. So the attention to detail, the understanding of sustainability, and they're not the only producers in Austria. They're doing that. Everyone, I think, of the wines that we're tasting here are working in that size to understand what's happening in the vineyard, what's happening with sustainability, and then getting the utmost quality, the maximum quality in the wine. So maybe we can move to Wesley. So I don't know, you want to give an introduction to the Comtel, John, or shall we?
I think we got a couple of photos here. Right. Okay. So we're just quasi-neighboring the Wachau with the Krems River Valley, the Kremstal in between Wachau and Kamptal, after the Kamp Valley. So we're going to visit the area around Langenlois. There you can see the arrow pointing to the vineyards of Wesseling. And Langenlois is I think, the main town in Austria for wine growing, almost 4,000 hectares surrounding the town, and an epicenter of experimentation, traditional cellar roads there. You can see common sites. And I'm not sure if we have a photo, but if you're looking for a great place to stay, the Loisium in Langenlois is like a wine mecca. Also, for those who want a little spa treatment, that's the place to go. But if you want to go and taste wines and drink some local gins, that's the place. I think this is one of your photos, Christopher. Is it by the preparation?
Yes, it is. Yeah, we're in the Leumer vineyards, and by chance we were at a moment where they're about to prepare a spraying or a covering for their vineyards, and the fellow there is actually hand dynamizing, if you will, a preparation. This is back in 2015, 2016, the Premium Wine Estates of Austria. So
there you go. I wonder which direction he was stirring at that point. All right, let's jump out of there and tell us a little bit about the Wesley.
Yeah, so Wesley, this is his Langenlois Ortswein, the village wine, if you can see that there. Grüne Veltliner from the Comtal. We're looking at a 2018 vintage, very different vintage from 2017 in the region. But I guess based on its overall profile, a bit more immediate, and I'll talk about the technical side of things afterwards. But in the glass, decidedly more immediate on the nose, with similar kind of peach apricot tones, and be orchard fruit, stone fruit, and still vibrant, and you get that mineral tone. We're now 100% Lois soils in vineyards predominantly. This is about half of his production. That is Davis Vesley, the proprietor and the hand in the winemaking with his team in terms of his production. And coming from these parcels, 60 some odd parcels south of the Langenlois village, mainly from the vineyards of Kremsfeld, Meschelberg, Lies, and Hassel. Average age of vines are 30 years old, and the same with the Nikolai Hoff I mentioned, 35 years of age, and you can certainly find some of this information on the web. But again, say he's a bit of the new kid on the block in terms of the comparison, and this is a good selection, John, because at the moment, Wesley is in conversion to Demeter certification. For the most part, they've been working with a branding or a vision or philosophy called Terra Factum, if you can see it on the label there, which is his personal take on biodiversity, ecology, and harnessing that energy and maintaining that energy in the vineyard. And as he's moving towards Demeter certification, he is moving away from machine intervention in the vineyards, as everything is handpicked, but reducing all the machine and all technical, well, not technical, but all machine in the cellar as well to satisfy Demeter, but at the same time maintaining integrity in the wine. And as you taste this wine, there's a certain freshness and an immediate, as I mentioned already. So the wine is more vibrant. We're in a different zone altogether. So there's a softer tone to the wine. Minerality and acidity is still there. We're in a northeasterly, north-south vineyard, if you will. I mean, it's or valley, the Comte Valley, Tal. Very different than what we are facing in the Vacau, where you get these cool winds coming in from the north, and then the warmth, as John mentioned, coming from the Panopian Plain up the Danube, kind of creating this shift in temperature, but a very different space and place. But the wines are similar because they're, I think, farmed at the similar altitudes, 270 to 300 meters above sea level, and a good comparison based on the quality and the energy of the wines to taste side by side between two separate appellations. Now, the little creature on what I love about this, because it is about harnessing everything that is in the vineyard, is a little ground squirrel, which finds its home in its habitat within these loam, Lois soils. So in the vineyards, mainly the Kremsfeld, where the majority of the grapes in the vineyards for this wine are coming from, is inhabited by this animal. And all through his line of products, you'll see little images of deer to the Fetischspiel, the peregrine falcon, to I believe a dragonfly as well, that represents animals and the husbandry that they embrace within the vineyard to maintain so that ecosystem, etc. And when you taste the wine, and I didn't want to go too technical on the wine, but I think when you taste it, you'll see where we're coming from. It is 50% cultured yeast, 50% spontaneous yeast, fermented separately. The reason being here is that he's moving towards full biodynamics under a Demeter certification. He's just wanting to maintain his production. And then the wines are blended, hence a slightly different profile, a bit warmer, a bit richer. Would not say conventional at all. By no means is this a conventional wine by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a question of a producer who's working through the steps of biodynamics, which I think is beautiful, and you can taste the wines vintage to vintage. And I think in the near future, be it 2019 vintage or 2020, we'll see the full expression of Langenlois Vesley under a Demeter certification in the future. I don't know if anyone has any other comments on the wine.
Well, I was going to point out that little symbol. Jen, can you see that?
Yeah.
So actually, if you could give us a little, your view on the two styles of Gruner Veltliner. This for me is a pretty classic Luss-based example, but then tell us a little bit about vegan wine. Is that an important thing for you, obviously, but do you think in the larger world, shall we say?
Yeah. Ironically, it's Europe who has embraced certification and embraced, putting the V sign, the V label on, just for clarification for folks. I thought it was really interesting. So this, of course, has to do with production exclusively. There are recommendations as far as vineyards and packaging goes. But if you do see that sign, it means that in the bottle during production, there were no animal products used.
Right. And stylistically, how did you find that these two matched up to your expectations of Grüner Veltliner?
I mean, they both expressed, again, intense terroir, minerality. I just felt like the one from Kamtel had a broadness to it, particularly sort of mid-palate, and it was a bit more earthy for me and almost lemon peel, where the Nikolaus was just very fresh and racy and delicate and just had incredible tension to it. So very different styles, both delicious, but certainly different.
Kind of matches my experience, right? The stone of the soil, the leaner, the tighter the wine, and that's expressed in the Nikolaus quite nicely, whereas the Lustbase one is broader, richer, more perfumed. Bruce, would you agree on that one?
Yeah, I think I was kind of surprised actually, because obviously I tried the Wachau first and was impressed with the florality and how much fruit was jumping out of the glass, and then when I went to the Vesle afterwards, it's really quite cool. It's, I mean, how much of that is soil based and how much of that is the producer's approach and how much of that is vintage, though? I don't know the answer to that.
I think
that's a big discussion.
There's clear difference. Sorry.
I think Bruce and John. I think in this scenario, with doing some vintage, asking a vintage report from Vesle, and then looking on the Austrian side, and I'm sure on the chat room, any other specialists from Austria can chime in. But 2017 and 28 were very different. 2018 was what they say in Kamtel, the highest or the hottest on record. Since I don't know what year or as many years in terms of heat degrees or temperature, and the earliest harvest on record in the Kamtel. So again, the vintages are almost like yo-yo, so different from each other. So again, the wines do show very different based on so different vintages. Being themselves, the quality of the producer. Yes, maybe it's an approach, but I think they've done the best they can to make a beautiful wine. But yeah, I think that's a vintage question. Anyone else has any comment? I'm not sure.
We'll wait for some comments to come in. But this just in, get this, if you're a sommelier student, grab a pen, write this down. The Wachau has officially become a DAC, Austria's latest DAC.
Wow.
Just announced.
Right?
I just got a text message in from the Austrian press office. So breaking news right here on the Canadian-Austrian round table. Wow, that's exciting.
I literally thought that would never happen.
Well, it was pretty much an appellation as far as we were concerned. It was just the administrative side that hadn't yet caught up. But let's move on for something completely different. We're going to leave Austria's most planted white grape behind, Grüner Veltliner, which, by the way, is almost 50% of all white wine plantings, over 30% of all plantings, period. And now we're going to move on over to the Burgenland, the North Burgenland, around the Neusiedler See, that lovely little puddle right up against the Hungarian border, that shallow, reedy lake that provides for lots of fun water sports in the summer. And here we are, we're looking across from the town of Gols to the Leiteberg Mountains in the background. So we're going to taste wine from pretty much the vineyard we're standing in now, and then we're going to move over into those faraway hills in just a moment.
John, I'm a little concerned. I think there's something wrong with my wine.
Well, I'm going to let Krysta take that one over, but it was made by this lovely couple here, Birgitta and Gerhard Pittnauer. That's the couple standing in their vineyard drinking Pitnat. How's that for the commercial spin on a popular category these days? We're not drinking Pitnat or Petnat. We're tasting. Actually, Krysta, why don't you take it away? Tell us about the perfect day.
Oh, so we're tasting a wine that's named after a Lou Reed song with a bit of a party label here. The thing I love so much about Burgenland is that there's really a lot of room for experimentation, a little warmer, lots of grapes grow. And Pittenauer has been one of the OG producers there, focusing on red grapes originally, but now doing cool stuff like skin contact wine, like this, made in the Altenburg vineyard in Gols, close to the Lake Neusiedl. And a blend of Chardonnay, Muscat Autumnal, Grüner Veltliner, and Traminer. Mixed skin contact for a few of the grapes, and then some Chardonnay for freshness. And natural ferment with temperature control at 8 months in used barrique. I think this is not a scary orange wine at all. It really is a skin contact wine with texture and a little bit of tannin, but also the freshness that you would expect of a white wine from Austria.
Now that may seem like a pretty radical and strange blend, but don't forget we're in the land of gemischte Satz, right? The field blends were the only type of vineyards that existed really up until the last century or so. So to have different wines, different varieties in a blend like this, although this is not a field blend as far as I know, I think these are different vineyards that are harvested separately and then blended. I'm not sure. Maybe
Yes.
Blended just at the end before bottling. They're all vinified separately and picked separately. But yeah.
But I think the wine matches the personality of the producer. It's always nice when those things line up nicely. But if you've been to the Pittenauer's place, it seems like the place where you would want to go and spend at least a full evening, not just a quick stop-in tasting in the afternoon. He's got 2 turntables. He's got a microphone. He's got the setup for fun, for party. And a striking thing he said to me once when we were visiting, he said, 20 years ago, I would meet with my winemaking colleagues and I'd be a little embarrassed because they'd be all talking about the pH and the TA and the technical details, parameters of their wines. He, of course, had no idea because he had never done an analysis in his life. And now fast forward to this time, and really very few people actually want to talk about that stuff. They're looking at what's in the glass and judging on that. Now, where do you think this wine fits in? You'll notice that it's not labeled as DAC or even appellation wine. It's just Austria, Österreich. So I know that it's challenging to get wines like this passed by the tasting panels, and this is not a problem unique to Austria. It happens all over the world. Should these wines be included in the appellation regulations, or should they just be left out on their own in their own little fringe nebulous category?
I think that's a good question to ask the winemakers. I'm sure a lot would love to see their wines labeled with the place that they come from, especially because they're so proud of their region and of their vineyards. I think that this should be labeled, certainly, if they would like it to be from Burgenland. It really is an expression of that place. Gerhard was very generous to give me a little vintage report. 2017 was a scary one to begin with a big freeze in May, a warm spring, a hot and dry summer, and then a humid September. But everything turned out with great physiological ripeness, and I think that these wines really are an expression of the place that they come from.
If I may chime in, I mean, to answer your question, John, and to continue with what Krysta was saying, is I find with anything like artists, and I believe that many of these wines and the wines around the world that we love and enjoy, there's a bit of artistry. So it's almost like an underground mixtape in a way, in that, sure, it's not going to be part of the mainstream. It's not going to get the A&R reps excited and getting on the top 20 list, but I don't know if they need to be on the top 20 radio lists, because it's all about the people behind the wines. And the consumers that are drinking. I mean, from what Krysta's doing over at Paris, what Bruce will be presenting at Grand Cru, and what we pour at Aloe on occasion, and we pour wines of this nature and texture in front of our public, of whatever pocketbook. I guess what I'm getting at is that the people and the diversity of people that are drinking these wines and enjoying them might be as powerful or more diverse than the classic appellation drinkers. Not to say one is worse than the other, but I think coming from the proverbial underground or mixtape expression, you get that momentum, and then all of a sudden these wines are currently and become part of that spectrum. People are listening, people are tasting these wines. I've come around and I've always enjoyed these wines, and there's the full range of good and bad wines made in this way, and just as the same way in the wines we tasted prior to this, that they're the good and bad, or better made, if I would say. So I think in a way, I look at these wines as like these happy mixtape versions that we pass to friends, and then momentum gathers and people are drinking them.
So let me just ask you this then, point blank, is the appellation at all relevant to you as a wine buyer and to your customers, or are you happy that it's just simply Austria? Does it make a difference to you?
I think the proof is in the pudding, man. When you taste the wine and you feel a sense of energy and place, and having been there, and we as sommeliers and wine buyers are sharers of these wines, when we've been and visited to the place, we, as we share this, is it important? I believe to a certain degree, yes. Kendrick Lamar being up on the stage of the Grammys and doing his performance and winning his awards, it's great. But at the same time, he's got his street cred, or we understand where they're coming from. So I think it's equally important in a certain way. It might be important for some, it might not be important for others. I think what's in the bottle is where it's at, and there's no reason why we wouldn't pair or use this wine at Aloe or any of our other of our establishments the same way I wouldn't have it at my corner wine bar 5 minutes down the road from my home. And I think it's equally beautiful. So I don't know how to answer the question, but I think wherever I can
you
get
did a brilliant job. I think there's a
Yeah,
future in politics for you. Absolutely.
No
politics. before we move on, does anyone else want to make a comment on appellation, no appellation, care, not care? Should Austrian authorities embrace these styles, or just let them be as they are in their land of freedom?
I think Austrian authorities are coming to embrace these styles. I think it's been maybe a hard road in Austria, kind of like it is in any region with some beautiful classic wines, to understand that there is room for everyone and room for different styles of wine. But I think just the fact that these wines are being shown here, that Wines of Austria has, begun to embrace these styles of wines, which maybe 10 years ago would have been super weird, is a testament to what's happening in Austria and the rest of the world.
Totally
John,
fair. Yeah.
Talk about appellation. I know we are on time, but you've got back in bottle, you've got a panel tag, which might be also a momentum for them or something to recognize. Can you kind of give us a little brief, or give the world a brief on the Panel designation, if it's appropriate?
Well, it's another association of producers that aims a little bit higher than the mean, like Vineerva, which is a great producer association, and the STK down in Styria. So for me, it's a sign that I look towards. It's a sign that I would take as a very positive one. But it's greater awareness outside of wine circles in Austria is probably very small. It hasn't quite filtered down to the consumer level yet, I don't think. But that doesn't mean it's not important. But while we're on that theme, why don't we move along? Let's jump into our last two reds here, so we have some time for questions.
John, can I interrupt for a quick moment?
You can.
I just want to say that I think this wine is it's important in this lineup. I think it's a style that needs to be there. It's exciting and delicious. I honestly think how much does the appellation matter to this? I think it does. We just haven't found that definition yet, right? And right now we sort of have two parallel categories of wines: ones that are defined by their appellation, and ones that are a little bit more defined by their approach in the vineyard, and the wine. I hope it's appropriate, but I'm drinking this with some Comte, and it's wicked.
You're drinking
fantastic. Yeah.
I'm coming over. Well, 6 feet, 6.
I'm glad you're having a fine afternoon, Bruce.
Yeah. It's good. Look, it's legitimately a delicious wine.
Good. Well, I mean, your argument is the classic counter argument to the counter argument of we can't recognize skin contact wines for place. It's a style more than anything, or is it just that we don't have enough experience drinking skin contact wines from the Burgenland or from any other fill in the blank region that we could, in a blind tasting scenario, pick this out as obviously Burgenland skin contact white wine? We're not there yet.
Yeah,
I'm certainly not there yet. maybe we just need more time. But we're running out of time. So let's talk about the wild and wonderful world of Dr. Zweigelt. That is not Fritz Zweigelt there. Let's jump over. So we are going to travel to the capital here, to Vienna, the only city, as most I'm sure know, that has any significant vineyard acreage within its boundaries, some 800 hectares. And again, a terrific place to go and hang out if you want to sip some wine and have a beautiful view of the city. So you're up in the top left corner there. That's where the Nussberg vineyard is, where every year there are tremendous parties, and the best one thrown by Mr. Fritz Winninger himself. So this is the view if you were looking down from Nussberg, more or less, into the downtown area. And there's the man himself, Fritz Winninger, who his name is not on this label. He's got his own eponymous label, but he purchased this winery about half a dozen or so years ago, a neighboring vineyard, which he now uses as his experimental laboratory. So we're going to be tasting the Zweigelt Natural, and I'd love for Jen to tell us a little bit about your impressions on this wine.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to chat to Fritz this morning, and indeed this is his second winery, and it's a winery where he has the opportunity to play a little bit. So this is Zweigelt. It's 2018. It's natural, beautiful packaging, of course. It's also biodynamic, but in, if you can see this, the Respect label that you were referring to earlier, John, and I got a bit of a lowdown on that today with him. And a few of the important differences between that and the Demeter certification is that this certification is only for wine. And it is a little bit more flexible in terms of some modernization. So with that, this wine is of course from Zweigelt, and this is the top planted red grape in Austria, and it was developed, I think, back in the 1920s, and it's a blend, or a crossing, I should say, of St. Laurent and Blaufränkisch, and it's very dark in color, as you can see, and it has characteristics. It's kind of like dolcetto. So it's got characteristics of cherry, a little bit of spice, really plush and lush, with soft tannins as well. So yeah, he wanted me to note that this doesn't see any new oak, and it was macerated on the skins for a couple of months, and then did see some stainless steel concrete egg before bottling.
Well, I mean, if anyone's interested in the story of Zweigelt, grab this book if you can. This was published by the Austrian Wine Marketing Board with Willi Klinger and Veselka editing. Willi Klinger, former head of the Austrian Wine Marketing Board. Brilliant book, by the way. Absolutely a reference bank of all of the history of the Austrian country, including the creation of Zweigelt back in 1921. Good call, Jen. Fritz Zweigelt, working at Klosterneuburg, he was head of federal viticulture in Austria, created this variety out of Blaufränkisch and St. Laurent to increase both quantity and also quality. And it became, since the 60s, since it took well to the Lenz-Moser trellising system, the most planted red variety by a good margin. It's about 3 or 4 times more than Blaufränkisch, which comes in a distant second. And well, for me, I don't know. I think your dolcetto analogy is a pretty good one. Softer, lighter, fresher. Mm-hmm. For me, I don't think it can ever be a very serious wine. And by serious, I use that word carefully. I think its best expression is something fresher, fruitier, juicier. This is a 0 sulfur natural wine. For me, a dash of sulfur would have made me happy here, to be perfectly honest. It starts to get a little bit woolly. But it's certainly crushable. I would recommend chilling this down. Krysta, what do you think of this style wine? You'd be pouring this at Paris, would you not? Quite happily.
Oh yeah, this is the kind of stuff that that pouring at Paris would sell it pretty quickly. Stuff like this with low sulfur and kind of that wilder style tends to be really popular. yeah, the wines like this and from the Copaches in Burgenland, that sort of style is very popular these days.
Certainly pretty tasty wine. Anyone else? Bruce, would you pour this at the Grand Cru Deli? Does this fit into your idea of Zweigelt?
My idea of Zweigelt?
Tell us about your Zweigelt.
Look, the wine's lively. It's got a vibrancy to it. It has a sort of lift. It's aromatically lifted.
Are you being kind, Bruce?
Yeah, I think it's amazing how volatile it is. You know what? I kind of like it. It has this crazy freshness and liveliness. It's fun. I think I'd happily drink it. Is this the truest expression of Zweigelt? I don't know.
Zweigelt for you, is it a wine for aging or a wine for crushing?
No, I haven't had positive experiences with aged Zweigelt yet, but I'm sure they exist. I just haven't been exposed to it. The stuff that I've tried has seemed tired. I tend to like Zweigelt younger and fresher, a lot like this, but the level of VA in here is I think defines the wine. I don't know. What's your thought?
I know. I think it looks like you got a freaky side to you there, Bruce, and I think we all do at place and time. But I will say, once I was in I was down in Australia a couple years back and had a beautiful meal with wines all in this spectrum, technically well made from knowing where they're coming from, and then also with a cuisine that was adapted or just naturally between things that were pickled or preserved or fresh, just freshly picked, harvested, etc. So
has this wine been pickled? Oh, okay, that explains it. That's cool.
Because we're talking Austria, I didn't want to talk about Australia, but in the same way, the cutting edge of what everyone is doing there and in Austria in terms of technically sound, embracing their origin, the land, I would say that I had one of the best meals ever with food that was prepared and presented with the wines in mind and the wines with the food in mind. So in that sort of theory, I'm open to sort of listening to music and seeing art that may be outside of my understanding. But if I'm guided in the right way, then all of a sudden you're like, holy mackerel, you know what? This is cool, or this has a place. So I will say Summertown Aristologists drinking Okota barrels and such that are made somewhat in this spectrum way down under, and having the right food and cuisine really showcases these wines in a way. And so I think part of our challenge is from an MS perspective or an MW or Paris to Aloe is a matter of like, what is the right space and place? And I think this is a wine that I think there is a dish or a individual or a outfit, if you will, that you can put together and be like, you know what, I'm going to get a bit freaky with you and present you, and I think you will like it.
Well said, Christopher, well said. And in Fritz's defense, I will say that the man knows how to make wine. This is purposeful neglect. This is not careless neglect. And this was fully intentional, I'm sure. And if you've tasted the wines under his Vinnigan label, his amazing Gemischte and Pinot Noirs, etc., I mean, those are what we would call classic spot on wines.
Legendary.
Indeed. And that's a great little segue into our final wine here as we kind of wind things down. We are going to taste Blaufränkisch, the grape of the future, as I never tire of saying. Someday folks will agree with me on this one, but I mean, quite literally, 25 years ago, nobody wanted to hear about this grape variety. It was lean, it was high acid, it was hard, it was a little angular. And now, of course, those are all the things that we love so much in our red wines, those crunchy, fresher, lighter, higher or lower alcohol styles. So here we are in Live-Zuschauern. We are going to taste yet another biodynamic wine here from Gernot Heinrich and his lovely wife, Heike. So here we are in this kind of limestone and schist stretch of hills here, just on on the western side of Noisy-le-Sec. These are not big mountains. They're only a couple hundred meters high, but enough to get them off the plain and cool the air. And what I appreciate a lot about this variety, one, it is authentically Austrian. This is the first known mention of it in a public forum in Vienna in 1862, and it was called Blaufränkisch. I won't get into the history of the variety and the difference between the Frankish family and the Heimisch family. And it's even spelled out there for you, Bruce, so you can pronounce it next time you're in a Viennese wine bar. You can get it right. But I mean, it literally is a grape of the place. It's the most widely planted grape in this central part of Europe. Grows a lot next door in Hungary, of course, too. But for me, all due respect to Zweigelt and even Pinot and the Cabernets that are scattered here and there, this is Austria's red grape variety. And it's a variety that really represents place strikingly well. Another feature that I think folks in the wine industry can appreciate, because it does change pretty dramatically, and all you need to do is taste the wines from the limestones of the Leiterberg versus the heavier clays of the Mittelburgenland, or the schist of the Eisenberg, for example, or even the schistous vineyards up in the Leiterberg itself, and you'll see quite a dramatic difference from light and floral to darker red-fruited to really downright spicy and angular. So let's have a little taste of this wine here. I'll show you the label. There you go. So this is the Leiterberg version. He also makes a couple of single vineyard versions as well. It's a terrific range to taste through. And talk about a natural style of winemaking. This is about as natural as it comes, although very much more so on the precise natural, if I could call it that. Here you got a lot of reductive notes. Blaufränkisch is a variety that can tend towards reduction much more so than oxidation. So you're going to get a lot of the peppery character that does blow off in time. But this is remarkably youthful. 2016 was a great vintage, and this wine still has a couple of years ahead of it before it's in prime drinking condition, and then after that I think it'll sail for another decade or so quite handily. What do you think? Yes, Chris?
Based on your experience and knowledge, what can you say about the what I'm getting at is, we look at the great grapes of each nation. You've got Pinot Noir for France and Burgundy. You've got Nebbiolo, Sangiovese, perhaps in the same camp, and their growing conditions and sensitivity. Where does Blaufränkisch sit in that spectrum? Even if you want to look at Xeno Mavro of Greece on the other end of that rainbow arc of flavor.
Well,
what can you say?
As I said, for me, it's the most representative variety of this part of Central Europe, Austria, and surrounding countries. It has a half dozen synonyms: Lemberger in Germany, Frankovka, Slovenia, Slovakia, Franca Modra, I think it's called. Anyhow, it grows quite widely, and as I said, pretty representative of place. But if I had to generalize stylistically, certainly when I've poured various versions of it blind, it seems to kind of land somewhere between Northern Rhone Syrah with that peppery character. Sometimes you can move a little bit more herbal, such as Cabernet Franc-esque, Loire Valley-ish, and then sometimes it's a little more plump and juicy, a la Dolcetto, something Northern Piedmontese. That's more or less how I would triangulate it stylistically.
Yes,
it's been terrific to see producers pulling back on wood, pulling back on extraction, understanding that, it used to be thought that only the Mittelburgenland and those heavy clay soils could grow great Blaufränkisch. And this was in the era when bigger was better. And now it's since been discovered in the last 20 or so years that, the range of styles is really quite impressive.
So still a world to be
Still a word to be discovered? Yes, absolutely.
A world, yeah.
It's not a variety that trips off the tongue with particular ease, certainly in English-speaking countries, and it's not a household name yet, but as I said, grape of the future. What do you think, Jen? Is it the grape of the future for you?
Well, it is. It's pretty delicious, a little funky, of course, but what I really love about it is just like that intense tart berry fruit and this really wonderful kind of silky texture. So in that way, I would equate it in a way to to Pinot Noir. It seems very elegant.
Yeah, this is a pretty finessed and perfumed version, more of a limestone expression. I know this is a mix of different vineyards, but this for me is a much more limestone-driven style of Blaufränkisch, if we're going to talk about soils in particular. Bruce, you have a smile on your face. Were you just reaching for a bottle of Lemberger for comparison?
Yeah. I'm doing a comprehensive tasting of Blaufränkisch here. Interesting. I mean, I don't drink a lot of Northern Rhone Syrah, but the comparison to me is interesting. I don't really see the connection between the two. But, no, it's a delightful wine. It smells a bit like farts, but it's in a nice way.
Well, thank you. All right. On that note, maybe not on that note, ladies, would you like to chime in with a last thought on Blaufränkisch or Austrian wine before we wrap things up?
Bruce, I think it's nice to remember that a lot of these wines can age. I think even the Zweigelt that we tasted, even like 6 months to a year or 2 years in bottle, maybe not like 10, like something like this, will really do wonders for some of the funkier aromas, whether it's VA or a little reduction. Very special wines that I really love.
I will note that it's glass stoppered, the Vino Lock. This and a couple of the other wines we've tasted. So yeah, a slower evolution in bottle. And for me, this is a wine you decant. It's a question of oxygen, as simple as that. Just give it some time, Bruce. Listen, I think we're a little bit over time here. I'm going to start getting messages from the head office there, Austrian Wine Marketing Board. But I wanted to thank you, the panelists, for weighing in with your thoughts here. So lovely to spend some time, a little afternoon, even if we're not together. We are together in so many other ways. And thanks all of you for having tuned in. And we hope you found some interesting things. We hope you're inspired to go and explore Austrian wines a little bit more. Catch this presentation again recorded somewhere on YouTube. I'm sure if you search for it, ye shall find. And until then, let's all stay safe and let's keep up these sort of virtual communications, because this has been a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Opportunity. Cheers.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
You need me to send you some content?
That would be
Curbside pickup.
If you could send some over, that would be great.
I mean, I get tons of it here. Very good. That was great. Oh, John Bale.
Bye, John.
All right.
Question.